I got a message yesterday from a white guy named Sean who told me that we don't owe black people reparations because the first slave owner in the colonies was black. He even thinks black people owe everyone else reparations because they started it. He used all caps over like 5 direct messages, so I knew I needed to get right on it. Sean, you are correct that the first chattel enslaver we know about on this continent was black. His name was Anthony Johnson. He was actually brought here in 1621 as an indentured servant himself. But it's important to define the kinds of slavery that are involved in this sordid tale. An indentured servant is sort of like a temporary slave. They didn't get paid during the time they were indentured, aside from food and lodging. But they had a contract that said they'd work for a certain period of time, usually about 4 to 7 years, and then they would be freed. An indentured servant was usually given a payment of land or goods or money at the end of the contract to get their lives restarted after their indenture. That's an important part of this story, so take notes. Johnson, he eventually earned his freedom and became a landowner, possibly with what he was paid at the end of his contract. And he got some indentured servants of his own and hired some paid help. One of his laborers was John Casor. Casor claimed that he had completed his indenture and he wanted to leave. But Johnson said, no. Casor has agreed verbally to serve me for life, so you got to stay here. There was no contract, it turned out. There was no paper trail and no way to prove either man's argument. Upon hearing that Casor was available for work, a neighbor named Robert Parker gave Casor a job, and this pissed Johnson off. He sued Parker for stealing his servant. This set a lot of bad shit rolling downhill for black people, not because Johnson was black, but because Casor was. Johnson's the landowner, Casor was the laborer. In court, Casor was just some property Johnson and Parker were fighting over. Casor didn't get a say in any of it. Well, in 1655, a Virginia court ruled that Casor must be returned to Johnson and serve him for the rest of his life. The rest of his life. Casor now went from being an indentured servant to a piece of enslaved chattel. Chattel slavery was a whole different thing from indentured servitude. Chattel meant there was no end date for being enslaved. You were born enslaved and you would die enslaved, and there was no way over, under, around, or through it. You were stuck as a slave. The court took Johnson's word for it because a landowner was more believable than a piece of property. It didn't matter that Johnson was black. He was a property owner. Therefore, he had some clout. And in this case, he said he owned Casor. Did I mention that Casor was black? Well, within just a few years, inspired by this case, Virginia passed laws that said if you were black, you could be enslaved for life. And if you were white, you could not. Then Sean DMs me saying that the first slave owner was black, so that means I don't know him anything. History says that it never mattered what color the enslaver was, but a whole legal framework was built up around the characteristics of the people who could be enslaved. The colonies spent the next 250 years turning black labor into white wealth. After chattel slavery ended, right up until now, they made sure that black families still couldn't get what was stolen through them, through redlining, through segregation, through voter suppression and mass incarceration. And by the way, slavery still exists, Sean, in our penitentiary system. You and I inherited the benefits of that whole framework. Once we learn the truth, if we use it to excuse inaction, then we are to blame. But when we learn and use our knowledge to educate, then we can earn back a little redemption, or at least a little bit of our soul. We don't owe reparations because one time a black man did a terrible thing, and Anthony Johnson did a terrible thing. We owe reparations because white power turned race into laws that stripped freedom from millions while building a country that still pretends it doesn't remember how any of that happened. Get curious. Let us know what you learned.